Welcome to Readers of the Lost Art with your presenter, Dr. Paul Anthony Taylor, a recovering academic. And the title of today's talk is Homer's Odyssey Explained. Book 2, Telemachus Set Sail. Hi everybody, and I won't witter on at the beginning for very long. I just wanted to give you a brief context. I'm going to read through the whole of Book 2 and comment as I go along, but I'm going to try and keep the commentary down to manageable levels. And the idea is, I will do the first 4 books, which is known as the Telemachy collectively, and because they're all to do with Telemachus and his experience that forms the prelude for when Odysseus is introduced, Odysseus's wanderings and Odysseus's homecoming. So I'll do the first 4 books reading through like this. I've already done 1, and then we'll see where we're at. If people are still keen and there's interest, I'll just plough on through all 24 books. But I'll also do, after the first 4, maybe a summary of the concepts encountered in the first 4 books and more background information. I won't do it. I'll just do relatively small amount of commentary in this talk to avoid just stretching it out. So one other thing to point out before I start is the formatting. I've tried to keep relatively self-contained sections of the text, so the length of the quotes will vary depending upon what I'm trying to get across in one slide. And that will obviously mean the font will change as well. So apologies for that, but I've tried to make it as coherent as possible in a narrative sense. And then more thematically, I think the things to look out for in Book 2 are the role in which the concept of process plays a part. And in the UK at the moment, politically, it's quite interesting. Irrespective of what your politics are, there are a lot of politicians, and I can only speak for the UK. I don't know what it's like. I suspect it's similar in other countries. But politicians are increasingly technocratic. They hide behind the technocracy. They hide behind due process and bureaucracy. And there is process in Book 2 of the Odyssey because Athena, in the guise of Mentes, as we saw in Book 1, has given advice to Telemachus to go to the assembly and argue his case. But what's different from today's due process is once he's stated his case, this takes away all excuses for the people who are subsequently going to be punished by the gods and by Odysseus. So yes, you go through due process, but then if you don't take your chance for mercy, you're punished. And that's maybe the big difference. I think another frustration lots of people have in Western democracies at the moment is it's fine to have due process, but often there's a complete lack of accountability. Politicians who do wrong never seem to pay the price. People in charge of large organisations swan off with huge big pensions, and on it goes. So I'm interested in the difference between the days of the Odyssey, when there were real consequences and life just seemed a lot more, yes, brutal, but also it's one of the themes you'll see throughout the Odyssey. To what extent is punishment justified and righteous, which is quite a foreign concept in some ways to the modern understanding. So I just think that's something to pay attention to. And then finally, the concept of cunning. Odysseus is, we'll see later on, is an emblem for cunning. At the very beginning, I'm trying to remember the translation, the Fagles translation I'm using. It was along the lines of a man of many twists and turns. Is the phrase used to express the concept of him being cunning. And I will address that at a future date because there's whole books being written on what the Odyssey contains as a encapsulation of the Western notion of what it is to be cunning and what it is to get ahead in life. So in Book 2, we still haven't obviously come across Odysseus yet in person, but his wife Penelope embodies cunning as well. So it's almost like a family trait. And I think at one point Athena says to Telemachus, you are your father's son and you embody his type of cunning. So cunning is a key theme, and we'll see it as we go along. So without more ado, I'll just get stuck in now. When young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, the true son of Odysseus sprang from bed and dressed. Over his shoulder he slung his well-honed sword, fastened rawhide sandals under his smooth feet, and stepped from his bedroom, handsome as a god. That's my morning schedule. At once he ordered heralds to cry out loud and clear, and summon the flowing herd Achaeans to full assembly. Their cries rang out, the people filed in quickly. When they'd grouped, crowding the meeting grounds, Telemachus strode in too, a bronze spear in his grip, and not alone. 2 sleek hounds went trotting at his heels, and Athena lavished a marvellous splendour on the prince, so the people all gazed in wonder as he came forward, the elders making way as he took his father's seat. So, quick comment I'd make on this is his smooth feet is a very concise way of pointing out what a pampered life he's led. So he's about to go on a big trek of his own. It forms a parallel for the travels of his father when Telemachus goes on his own mini Odyssey. But the idea that his feet are smooth, they're not calloused, they're not full of bunions, he hasn't lived much of a life. He's just, tootled around the palace and been looked after. Handsome as a god, I think the relationship of people with the gods and the fact that the gods are always used as a frame of reference, even in throwaway comments, handsome as a god, it's all the way through, and it'll be a theme that comes up later on quite frequently. And then towards the end, Athena lavished a marvellous splendour on the prince, the way in which, remember, one of the key themes of the Telemachy, the first 4 books, is Telemachus coming to terms with adulthood, growing into his responsibilities. And it's the way in which, in Greek epic stories and also the myths, the gods are the personification, they're the embodiment of not only natural forces, but you can see here that Athena is giving confidence to the prince. So the people all gazed in wonder as he came forward. And that just made me think, it's a slightly tangential point, but there's a theme I want to explore later. And it's contained within a book it's an odd book by Philip Reith, called Charisma, The Gift of Grace and How It Has Been Taken Away From Us. And he makes a distinction between what he calls charisma in the form, he calls it charisma of perception, which he defines as relating to habits and customs and traditions and what you could call inner interdictions. So things that are forbidden that we've internalized because that's how we've been brought up to act through tradition and custom. And then, some people have a charisma that they convey traditional forms of behavior. So the charisma of a church leader, the charisma of a rabbi or an imam or whatever, is traditionally understood. Charisma was this God-given gift of helping people come to terms with and respect custom and tradition. But there's also a much more modern form of charisma that's been adopted by politicians and people, which is it's expressed in Reef's book, and it's because my pronunciation's awful, Rieff, if you were struggling to work out how I was saying Reef. He talks also about charisma as encouragement to transgression. So you can be led astray, various pop idols have charisma in that sense. There will be various gurus, ahead of cults, shout out to Jay in Texas, who have charisma and they can encourage people to transgress. And we'll explore this in future, but again, this notion of charisma and the role it plays in how people behave and how they either follow or reject leadership is a theme that runs throughout the Odyssey. And I think what distinguishes the Odyssey from modern times, and this is why I'm interested in the Odyssey, to compare and contrast then and now. And it shows you, I think, that their notion of charisma, their notion of following someone in authority, had a completely different gloss on it than the modern day, much more either celebrity-led or politicians with cheesy charisma that tend to distort politics or lead the electorate astray in lots of ways, or just promise them the earth and deliver nothing. The first to speak was an old lord, Egyptius, stooped with age, who knew the world by heart, for one dear son had sailed with King Odysseus, bound in the hollow ships to the stallion land of Troy. The spearman Antiphus, but the brutal Cyclops killed him, trapped in his vaulted cave, the last man the monster ate. 3 other sons he had, one who mixed with the suitors, Eurynomus, and 2 kept working their father's farms. Still, he never forgot the soldier, desolate in his grief. In tears for the son he lost, he rose and said among them, "Hear me, men of Ithaca, hear what I have to say. Not once have we held assembly, met in session, since King Odysseus sailed in the hollow ships." So just to quickly, Egyptius, the old lord. So it's this, you'll see it time and time again in this initial section, the concept of someone being old. And it says here, stooped with age, just to re-emphasize the old lord who knew the world by heart, so experience, this notion of tradition being valued. And he's in an interesting situation. He's the voice of old tradition, but his own family is split in the sense he had one son who died, so he was a loyal soldier. And it's interesting, when the brutal Cyclops killed him, the last man the monster ate. So if you think about that, he gets to witness the first few men being killed and eaten. So I just think that it's a very subtle way of showing that his son really did suffer. He was the last one to be eaten. And then he's got 3 other sons, one who mixed with the suitors, so one who's a bit of a wrong 'un, and 2 who were loyal and have stayed on his father's farm. So it's not a bad way. It's quite a concise way of showing how Ithaca as a society is riven down the middle. It's not a united community at this point. Who has summoned us now? One of the young men? One of the old-timers? What crisis spurs him on? Some news he's heard of an army on the march? Word he's caught first-hand so he can warn us now? Or some other public matter he'll disclose and argue? He's a brave man, I'd say. God be with him too. May Zeus speed him on to a happy end, whatever his heart desires. Winning words with a lucky ring, Odysseus' son rejoiced. The boy could sit no longer, fired up to speak. He took his stand among the gathered men. The herald Pisnor, skilled in customs ways, put the staff in his hand, and then the prince, addressing the old Egyptius first, led off with, "Sir, that man is not far off. You'll soon see for yourself. I was the one who called us all together." So again, just it's a constant theme throughout the Odyssey. Zeus and the gods are obviously interfered right from the proem at the very beginning of the epic. It's all structured around the gods' interference. So may Zeus speed them on to a happy end. And again, just to I've emboldened the bit where it says skilled in customs ways. It's to a modern reader, perhaps we don't fully appreciate the role that custom and tradition played in these sorts of societies. And again, just to repeat, I think that's why it's interesting to look at epic tales like this. And I will, of all the summary type, more background videos I want to do, I've referred to him before, but Richard Seaford's work on reciprocity and ritual as a key aspect that sets apart ancient Greek culture from our own. This constant circulation, this constant reciprocity of gifts, gift-giving, customs, expectations. And already we've seen in book 1, but in book 2, Xenia, the concept of hospitality and the reciprocity you're supposed to show to guests. That's what's been broken by the suitors. So in explicit and more implicit ways, the whole importance of custom is emphasized throughout the early books of the Odyssey. Something wounds me deeply, Not news I've heard of an army on the march, word I've caught first hand so I can warn you now, or some other public matter I'll disclose and argue. No, the crisis is my own. Trouble has struck my house, a double blow. First, I've lost my noble father, who ruled among you years ago, each of you here, and kindly as a father to his children. But now this, a worse disaster that soon will grind my house down, ruin it all, and all my worldly goods in the bargain. Suitors plague my mother against her will, sons of the very men who are your finest here. They'd sooner die than approach her father's house. So Icarius himself might see to his daughter's might see to his daughter's bridal, hand her to whom he likes, whoever meets his fancy. What have emboldened I ruled among you years ago, each of you here, and kindly as a father to his children. So it's the longevity of the link of Odysseus to the island of Ithaca is being emphasised. And also the father to his children. So it's not just Telemachus who's missing his father. This fatherhood applies to the role. When he's referred to as a king, it's more accurate, I think, to think of him as some type of baron or a senior member of the aristocracy. But there are numerous kings. It's not like a one all-powerful regal figure. But the idea that it's a constant theme, especially obviously in the first 4 books, which are about Telemachus. But the idea of absent fatherhood, and again, if you want to think of the difference between then and now, lineage and fatherhood and the clan was everything. And then you think of the fatherless or the absent father problem that's referred to in terms of social breakdown in the West at the moment. Some people subscribe to that idea, some people reject it as being significant. But there's, the very least you can say, we have a radically different attitude to family and the role of fatherhood. The question of I've emphasised plague there, so we'll see that the notion of the mother Penelope being plagued. I think later on, very shortly, we'll see the word devouring the resources of the house of Odysseus. So it's very clear that this is a form of, really bad, oppressive harassment. And it's also mentioned, we've just seen the idea that one of the sons of Aegisthus is already one of the suitors. So this idea that that there's a complicity. Yes, the suitors are behaving badly, but I think the notion of complicity, I think towards the end of his speech, Telemachus will very shortly see, basically says, what have the rest of you done while this has all been going on? You've just stood by. And again, I think that's a perennial, lifelong or age-old concept of the complicity of the herd. Whilst, the more charismatic, the more proactive people in the group behave well or badly, but there's this big bovine mass of people who just go along. And I think it's described in the first books of the Odyssey, and Odysseus is set up against this. Odysseus is very much the rise of the individual, and we're seeing the first early books, as we're seeing here in book 2, I think they're quite important for the context within which we then see Odysseus acting as an individual. Regarding the suitors, just while I'm thinking of it, I think in an earlier version of the story, before it was codified into what we now know as the Odyssey, I've read from various academics, there may have been as few as 20 suitors, and they were all from Ithaca. But in this version, I think they've done the work and calculated. They think from decoding the text, there's probably about 108 is the figure that's generally agreed upon. There are 108 suitors, and they're not all from Ithaca. So there have been, the story, the epics naturally evolve, but parts of the speech like this are emphasising the Ithaca-based concept of the suitors, whereas as the story progresses, we'll also find out there are, influences from outside Ithaca. So it weaves in and out this theme of Ithaca specifically. Not they. They infest our palace day and night. They butcher our cattle, our sheep, our fat goats, feasting themselves sick, swilling our glowing wine as if there's no tomorrow. All of it squandered. Now we have no man like Odysseus in command to drive this curse from the house. We ourselves, we're hardly the ones to fight them off. All we do is parade our wretched weakness. A boy inept at battle. Oh, I'd swing to attack if I had the power in me. By God, it's intolerable what they do. Disgrace. My house is a shambles. You should be ashamed of yourselves, mortified in the face of neighbours living round about. Fear the gods' wrath before they wheel in outrage and make these crimes recoil on your heads. So again, emboldened the infestation, the plague, like locust devouring is the theme that's shortly going to come up. But just to re-emphasize, they've had their warning. When later on carnage descends, I think it's a very important point that very early on, the people of Ithaca have had their warning. So if you've been warned and you still don't do anything, I'm really of the old school. I think I would have made a good ancient Greek. If you've been warned, you've had your chance, you don't take the warning, you deserve everything you get. I beg you by Olympian Zeus, by Themis too, who sets assemblies free and calls us into session. Stop, my friends. Leave me alone to pine away in anguish. Unless, of course, you think my noble father Odysseus did the Achaean army damage, deliberate harm, and to pay me back, you'd do me in, deliberately setting these parasites against me. Better for me if you were devouring all my treasure, all my cattle. If you were the ones, we'd make amends in no time. We'd approach you for reparations round the town, demanding our goods till you'd returned the lot. But now, look, you load my heart with grief. There's nothing I can do. Filled with anger, down on the ground he dashed the speaker's sceptre, bursting into tears. Pity seized the assembly. Well, first of all, Themis is the second wife of Zeus, and this is what I was saying about custom and tradition. Themis represents Themis represents the inalterable structures of nature and human institutions or norms. So when all the gods in mythology had an assembly, Themis was the one who called them together. So it's, as I pointed out, just in very throwaway little sentences, this concept of the importance of order, the importance of tradition and custom. It's embedded in the story. The parasites, the devouring, I've mentioned. And then, up until now, he's been filled with the spirit of Athena. He's been filled with a bit of confidence and maturity. But he lets himself down a bit. He bursts into tears like a big girl's blouse. And then pity sees the assembly. So you've been raised to a pitch of, righteous indignation. And then he blows it slightly by having a fit of the vapours. Big wimp. All just sat there, silent. No one had had the heart to reply with harshness. Only Antinous, who found it in himself to say, "So, high and mighty Telemachus, such unbridled rage. Well now, fling your accusations at us. Think to pin the blame on us. You think again. It's not the suitors here who deserve the blame. It's your own dear mother, the matchless queen of cunning. Look here, for 3 years now, getting on to 4, she's played it fast and loose with all our hearts, building each man's hopes, dangling promises, dropping hints to each, but all the while with something else in mind." So I'm not defending Antinous at all, but I just wanted to point out this is at least giving the other side's perspective. So I mentioned earlier, Penelope represents the family trait, the union, the marriage of two cunning people, man and wife, the matchless queen of cunning. I think, yeah, I think periphron is epithet that um, the epithet that is applied to Penelope is periphron, Periphron, and that means clear thinking, shrewd, intelligent in different ways. And remember, the opening description very early on in the poem was the man of twists and turns, was the phrase used to describe Odysseus. This was her latest masterpiece of guile. She set up a great loom in the royal halls, and she began to weave, and the weaving fine spun, the yarns endless, and she would lead us on. Young men, my suitors, now that King Odysseus is no more, go slowly, keen as you are to marry me, until I can finish off this web. So my weaving won't all fray and come to nothing. This is a shroud for old Lord Laertes, for that day when the deadly fate that lays us out at last will take him down. I dread the shame my countrywomen would heap upon me. Yes, if a man of such wealth should lie in state without a shroud for cover. Her very words, and despite our pride and passion, we believed her. In terms of the overall book, I think the loom story is repeated in book 19. Penelope says it. She tells the same story to Odysseus, who at that point still disguised. And then there's the shade of one of the suitors, Amphimedon. I think he almost verbatim tells the same story to the shade or the ghost of Agamemnon. The other thing I'd point out is the shroud for old Lord Laertes. So she's playing on again, she's manipulating the culture's dependence upon respect for the elderly, respect for tradition. And she's also, so there's two things. She's depending upon, she's using she's in a vulnerable position as the wife with the absent husband. So she's using what she can to be manipulative. She's using the respect for tradition. So that's the first reason for spinning the shroud. But then she's also, what has she got? All she's got is this domestic task of spinning. So it's the metaphor as well for spinning a yarn, what we use now, even now today, for telling a story. She's telling a story about spinning yarn. So it's spinning yarn squared. So by day she'd weave a great and growing web. By night, by the light of torches set beside her, she would unravel all she'd done. 3 whole years she deceived us blind, seduced us with the scheme. Then, when the wheeling seasons brought the 4th year on, one of her women, in on the Queen's secret, told the truth, and we caught her in the act, unweaving her gorgeous web. So she finished it off against her will. We forced her. So that's always, I suppose, in any epic or aristocratic court-based story, there's always this risk of being betrayed. And in this case, one of the servants, and we'll see later on as the story progresses, a lot of, I think, is it 20 of the serving girls have been, I'm trying to find a polite way of putting this, they've been very familiar with the suitors, let's put it that way. So again, it's all part of the dissolute nature of the house in Ithaca. This is just yet one more indication, we'll see more later, but the betrayal of Penelope, this is what she's combating. And these are just some images. John William Waterhouse, he did the famous painting of Narcissus Necco. And unless I'm imagining things, the Narcissus Necco paintings in Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool, and I think this is too. I'm pretty sure I've seen this. So the suitors, it's either a delivery from Interflora or it's the suitors all. It's quite an economic painting because a lot of the elements of the story are combined quite neatly. So this is Thomas Seddon from 1852, just called Penelope. And then if you think she's weaving by day and then she unravels it by night, if you think in terms of the day-night cycle, there's because the gods are involved in the Odyssey all the way through, there's also Penelope's reenacting this day-night distinction, this cycle. And I think there was an earlier version of the Odyssey in which it wasn't a funeral shroud for old Laertes, it was actually a wedding garment for Penelope herself. But that got changed over time. This is a Domenico Beccafumi, again called Penelope. I think this is 1514. And this is quite dreamy. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Penelope from 1869. And I've used a Joseph Wright of Derby painting, the bird and the vacuum pump. I did a video on that, but this is Joseph Wright of Derby, Penelope unravelling her web by lamplight from 1785. Now, Telemachus, here is how the suitors answer you. You burn it in your mind, you and all our people. Send your mother back. Direct her to marry whomever her father picks, whoever pleases her. So long as she persists in tormenting us, quick to exploit the gifts Athena gave her, a skilled hand for elegant work, a fine mind and subtle wiles too, we've never heard the like, not even in the old stories sung of all Achaea's well-coiffed queens, who graced the years gone by. Mycenae crowned with garlands, Tyro, and Alcmena, not one could touch Penelope for intrigue, but in this case she intrigued beyond all limits. So we will devour your worldly goods and wealth, as long as she holds out, holds to that course the gods have charted deep inside her heart. Great renown she wins for herself, no doubt, great loss for you in treasure. We'll not go back to our old estates or leave for other parts, not till she weds the Argive man she fancies. And this is slightly odd. The Tyro and Alcmena that are being referred to, they were both women who were seduced by gods. Tyro, I think, was seduced by Poseidon, and Alcmena was seduced by Zeus. So it's a bit slightly odd, and they're not good examples of cunning women, whereas Penelope is, because she's not being seduced, because she's sticking up for herself. So I don't know whether this is Homer being sarcastic or... And then I think, just for further context, why Penelope is dragging this out for as long as she can. In book 18, we find out that Odysseus told her to remarry when Telemachus's beard began to grow in. And again, I think this is one of the chronological slight inconsistencies. His father's been gone 20 years and he left when Telemachus was a toddler. So he's got to be around about a minimum of 21. So unless he was on puberty blockers, which I don't think were around in those days, his beard should have been growing in by now. So arguably, that's slightly the timing of how long the suitors have been around and why they didn't come earlier, and why Telemachus is only now growing into manhood. I do think if you did a very literal minded chronological analysis, there'd be some inconsistencies. But with calm good sense, Telemachus replied, Antinous, how can I drive my mother from our house against her will, the one who bore me, reared me too? My father is worlds away, dead or alive, who knows? Imagine the high price I'd have to pay, Icarius, if all on my own I'd send my mother home. Oh, what I would suffer from her father, and some dark god would hurt me even more when mother, leaving her own house behind, calls down her withering furies on my head, and our people's cries of shame would hound my heels. I will never issue that ultimatum to my mother, and you, if you have any shame in your own hearts, you must leave my palace. See to your feasting elsewhere, devour your own possessions, house to house by turns. But if you decide the fare is better, richer here, destroying one man's goods and going scot-free, all right then, carve away. But I'll cry out to the everlasting gods in hopes that Zeus will pay you back with a vengeance, all of you destroyed in my house, while I go scot-free myself. And without too many plot spoilers, that is an issue at the end. There's tagged on, rather, to the end of the Odyssey is the idea that the gods head off any potential reprisals because an immediate contemporary listener to the story would have thought, if you kill all these suitors, well, their family and relations are going to have a go back at you. It's never going to end, the vendetta. But the gods intervene at the very end to stop this. The Furies being Erinyes, I think they were called. Erinyes, the Furies from Hesiod's Theogony. They, as the name implies, were quite angry. But they in Hesiod's Theogony, the idea was they were born from the drops of blood that rained down when Zeus's father, Kronos, castrated his father, Uranos. So that's a nice origin story, isn't it? So Zeus's grandfather's been castrated by his father, and these drops of blood rain down, and these furious women. Aeschylus called them daughters of the night, so there's almost something vampiric about them. And Aeschylus wrote a play called the Eumenides, which means the kindly ones, and in the progress of that play, the Furies become the Eumenides, the kindly ones. And I think they also appear in Euripides' play, Orestes. Orestes kills Clytemnestra because she cheats on his father. And the Furies pursue him. And again, this concept of the Furies as indicative of or encapsulating guilt or punishment. It's quite a dramatic way to portray human emotions. And to seal his prayer, far-seeing Zeus sent down a sign. He launched 2 eagles, soaring high from a mountain ridge, and down they glided, borne on the wind's draught a moment, wing to wing-tip, pinions straining taut, till just above the assembly's throbbing hum they whirled. Suddenly, wings thrashing, wild onslaught of wings, and banking down at the crowd's heads, a glaring, fatal sign, talons slashing each other, tearing cheeks and throats, they swooped away on the right, through homes and city. All were dumbstruck, watching the eagles trail from sight, people brooding deeply what might come to pass. So, ornithomancy, I think it's called, which ornis is the Greek word for bird, and mantia, divination or predicting the future, auguries. So again, from a modern perspective, looking back, it's difficult to perhaps relate to this level of superstition. But the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks really took these type of omens seriously, especially the flight of birds. until the old warrior Halitherses, Mastor's son, broke the silence for them, the one who outperformed all men of his time at reading bird signs, sounding out the omens. He rose and spoke, distraught for each man there. Hear me, men of Ithaca, hear what I have to say. Though my revelations strike the suitors first of all, a great disaster is rolling like a breaker toward their heads. Clearly Odysseus won't be far from loved ones any longer. Now, right now, he's somewhere near, I tell you, breeding bloody death for all these suitors here. Pains aplenty too for the rest of us who live in Ithaca's sunlight air. So it's quite a specialist skill, isn't it? The one who outperformed all men of his time at reading bird signs. And again, the old warrior, the oldness, the idea that he's got life experience. Remember, all this is in contrast to Telemachus, who hasn't even really started adulthood yet. If there's any UK viewers, this just reminds me of this. On a slightly less serious note, if anyone's seen Clinton Baptiste, is a comedy performer who presents himself as a clairvoyant, who reads signs. It's vaguely funny, but anyway. Long before that, we must put heads together, find some way to stop these men, or let them stop themselves. Better for them that way by far. I myself am no stranger to prophecy. I can see it now. Odysseus, all is working out for him, I say, just as I said it would that day the Argives sailed for Troy, and the mastermind of battle boarded with them. I said then, after many blows and all his shipmates lost, after 20 years had wheeled by, he would come home, unrecognised by all. And now, look, it all comes to pass. So Homer's introduced via this story of this prophecy, almost, a completely accurate description of what's about to happen. So in that sense, there's no tension. Unless, it's a weird... I think this would be anti-Hitchcock, because Hitchcock was a great master of suspense. But in some senses, the narrative curiosities, we're just trying to find out precisely how this comes to pass. But we're being told in advance that it's exactly what is going to happen. And then I suppose there's further dramatic tension because the suitors and all the people who are going to be punished eventually have been warned yet again. They've been told exactly what's going to happen. So it ramps up the guilt of the suitors and those who refuse to listen. It's being ramped up to the max. And just one slight aside on the issue of the oracle or prophecies. Remember, Homer was purportedly, or by tradition, said to be blind. So this concept of prophecy as a different form of sight. And I think the oracle at Delphi was 480 BC. The Persians are on the verge of invading, and the oracle at Delphi said that a wooden wall will save Athens. And Themistocles persuaded the rest of the Athenians, that it meant it will be the navy that will save us rather than an actual wooden wall. So he interpreted it metaphorically and managed to persuade the rest of the Athenians to abandon Athens, so that they could depend upon the navy, this wooden wall that would save them. And then you had, the Battle of Salamis, where they defeated the Persians, and this was the great wooden wall that protected them. Stop, old man. Eurymachus, Polybus's son, rose up to take him on. Go home and babble your omens to your children. Save them from some catastrophe coming soon. I'm a better hand than you at reading portents. Flocks of birds go fluttering under the sun's rays. Not all are fraught with meaning. Odysseus, he's dead now, far from home. Would to God that you died with him too. We'd have escaped your droning prophecies then, and the way you've loosed the dogs of this boy's anger. Your eyes peeled for a house gift he might give you. Here's my prophecy. bound to come to pass. If you old codger, wise as the ages, talk him around, incite the boy to riot, he'll be the first to suffer, let me tell you. And you, old man, we'll clap some fine on you. You'll weep to pay, a fine to crush your spirit. So this is really, it couldn't be for a contemporary listener to this, as I've said, raised on the importance of tradition and respect for the gods and very superstitious times. This is all a very just outright absolute rejection in the most disparaging terms. It almost reminds me of people who don't like psychology or psychoanalysis. Their rejection when he says flocks of birds go fluttering under the sun's rays, not all are fraught with meaning. There's, it's a perennial thing. Some people are resistant to what they perceive to be too much interpretation. But the language, you old codger, wise as the ages, and then he impugns the motivation for the prophecy. Your eyes peeled for a house gift he might give you. It's quite, dramatic rejection of what normally is deemed to be the acceptable way of dealing with prophecies and the whole tradition of certain senior men in this society. Telemachus, here in front of you all, here's my advice for him. Let him urge his mother back to her father's house. Her kin will arrange the wedding, provide the gifts, the array that goes with a daughter dearly loved. Not till then, I'd say, will the island princes quit their taxing courtship. Who's there to fear, I ask you? Surely not Telemachus, with all his tiresome threats. Nor do we balk, old man, at the prophecies you mouth. They'll come to grief, they'll make us hate you more. The prince's wealth will be devoured as always, mercilessly. No reparations ever, not while the queen drags out our hopes to wed her, waiting, day after day, all of us striving hard to win one matchless beauty, never courting others, bevies of brides who'd suit each noble here. So, who's there to fear? There's no consequences for these people because the basically law and order in Ithaca is broken down with the absence of Odysseus. And Odysseus being, as was pointed out earlier, this father figure. With the absent father, all these people fill the vacuum that the, malign suitors. Telemachus answered firm in his resolve. Eurymachus, the rest of you fine brazen suitors, I have done with appeals to you about these matters. I'll say no more. The gods know how things stand, and so do all the Achaeans. And now all I ask is a good swift ship and a crew of 20 men to speed me through my passage out and back. I'm sailing off to Sparta, sandy Pylos too, for news of my long-lost father's journey home. Someone may tell me something, or I may catch a rumour straight from Zeus, rumour that carries news to men like nothing else. Now if I hear my father's alive and heading home, hard-pressed as I am, I'll brave out one more year. If I hear he's dead, no longer among the living, then back I'll come to the native land I love, raise his grave mound, build his honours high, with the full funeral rites that he deserves, and give my mother to another husband. A declaration, and the prince sat down as mentor took the floor. Odysseus' friend in arms, to whom the king, sailing off to Troy, committed his household, ordering one and all to obey the old man, and he would keep things steadfast and secure. With deep concern for the realm, he rose and warned, Hear me, men of Ithaca, hear what I have to say. Never let any sceptred king be kind and gentle now, not with all his heart, or set his mind on justice. No, let him be cruel, and always practice outrage. Think, not one of the people whom he ruled remembers Odysseus now, that godlike man, and kindly as a father to his children. So this is what I was saying about the whole absent father theme. And like I say, it's just interesting in the current situation in the UK, where there have been various riots. There's been a discussion in Parliament all about what constitutes righteous anger and what isn't justified. But at least in these times, there is, just to repeat, this absolutely explicit notion that within certain situations, absolute restorative justice is completely not just allowable, it's almost a moral imperative. So no, let him be cruel and always practice outrage. I think I missed my era. I don't grudge these arrogant suitors for a moment, weaving their violent work with all their wicked hearts. They lay their lives on the line when they consume Odysseus's worldly goods, blind in their violence, telling themselves that he'll come home no more. But all the rest of you, how you rouse my fury, sitting here in silence, never a word put forth to curb these suitors, paltry few as they are, and you so many. This is my point I think I made earlier about complicity and compliance, the bovine behaviour of large groups. And this is what allows, so I moan about things like technocracy and bureaucracy, but I've worked in large organisations where it's just infuriating. Most of the people involved know the processes lead to bad outcomes, but everyone just goes along with the path of least resistance because it's easier. Mentor, Euenor's son, Leocritus, rounded on him, shouting, "Rabble-rousing fool, now, what's this talk? Goading them on to try and hold us back? It's uphill work, I warn you, fighting a force like ours for just a meal. Even if Odysseus of Ithaca did arrive in person to find us well-bred suitors feasting in his halls, and the man were hell-bent on routing us from the palace, little joy would his wife derive from his return, for all her yearning. Here on the spot he'd meet a humiliating end if he fought against such odds. You're talking nonsense, idiocy." So again, for narrative purposes, this is really setting up the eventual battle in the halls of the house in Ithaca. They cannot say they haven't been warned. They've been dementedly, obstructive. "No more. Come, dissolve the assembly. Each man return to his holdings. Mentor and Halitherses can speed our young prince on, his father's doddering friend since time began. He'll sit tight a good long while, I trust, scrabbling for news right here in Ithaca. He'll never make that trip." This broke up the assembly, keen to leave. The people scattered quickly, each to his own house, while the suitors strolled back to King Odysseus's palace. Telemachus, walking the beach now, far from others, washed his hands in the foaming surf and prayed to Pallas. "Dear God, hear me. Yesterday you came to my house, you told me to ship out on the misty sea and learn if father, gone so long, is ever coming home. Look how my countrymen, the suitors most of all, the pernicious bullies, foil each move I make." Athena came to his prayer from close at hand, for all the world with Mentor's build and voice, and she urged him on with winging words. "Telemachus, you'll lack neither courage nor sense from this day on, not if your father's spirit courses through your veins. Now there was a man, I'd say, in words and action both. So how can your journey end in shipwreck or defeat? Only if you were not his stock, Penelope's too. Then I'd fear your hopes might come to grief. Few sons are the equals of their fathers. Most fall short, all too few surpass them. But you, brave and adept from this day on, Odysseus' cunning has hardly given out in you. There's every hope that you will reach your goal." So there's the lineage again. The goddess Athena's pointing out, you are of the same stock as Odysseus, even if in book 1 Telemachus had said, "Do we ever really know who our fathers are?" She also makes this point I was making: the union of marriage between Odysseus and Penelope is between two equals. Penelope is cunning just like him, and Telemachus shares the genetic stock of both of them. But also, again, I think, if you were going to be a arch conservative, I'd say in this there's like quite a strong argument for the institution of marriage, because Penelope and Odysseus complement each other in their attitudes and their qualities, and this is what is going to help Telemachus. This is why Athena says Odysseus's cunning is hardly given out in you. Only if you were not his stock, Penelope's too. So there's almost a fate involved that isn't just providence, it's also to do with how you've been brought up. Even though he's been an absent father, his values have carried on through Penelope. She hasn't gone off and had 5 baby fathers. She's stayed at home and looked after him, and even though he's a bit of a wimp, he's about to become a man. Put them out of your mind, these suitors' schemes and plots. They're madmen, not a shred of sense or decency in the crowd, nor can they glimpse the death and black doom hovering just at their heads to crush them all in one short day. But you, the journey that stirs you now is not far off, not with the likes of me, your father's friend and yours, to rig you a swift ship and be your shipmate too. Now, home you go and mix with the suitors there, but get your rations ready. Pack them all in vessels, the wine in jars and barley meal, the marrow of men's bones, endurable skins, while I make rounds in town and quickly enlist your crew of volunteers. Lots of ships in seagirt Ithaca, old and new. I'll look them over, choose the best in sight. We'll fit her out and launch her into the sea at once. The bit of emboldened at the top: not a shred of sense or decency in the crowd, nor can they glimpse the death and black doom hovering just at their heads to crush them all in one short day. So it's the way Homer, because this is a long oral epic, it's spoken out loud. The certain themes are repeated, so they really are impressed upon the listener. But part of the jeopardy involved in the epic now is this death and black doom hovering. So there's plenty of time, you're only on book 2 of 24 books. So this fate, this black doom that's going to await the suitors, it takes a long time to be finally delivered. And it's that expectation of the punishment is part of the pleasure of the epic, or it is if you're a sadist like I am. The one bit I've emphasised in the middle: mix with the suitors there, but get your rations ready. My interpretation of this is Athena's telling Telemachus to be duplicitous, to mix with the suitors, but at the same time get your rations ready. And you'll see in the next couple of slides, Telemachus, if I've interpreted correctly, he doesn't follow her advice. He doesn't act in a cunning fashion. He betrays, as in he's just not very good at being hypocritical, which you might see as a good thing. But Athena here, in my view, is telling him, be two-faced, mix with them, but at the same time prepare to leave. And so Athena, daughter of Zeus, assured him. No lingering now, he heard the goddess's voice, but back he went to his house with aching heart, and there at the palace found the brazen suitors, skinning goats in the courtyard, singeing pigs for roasting. Antinous, smiling warmly, sauntered up to the prince, grasped his hand and coaxed him, savouring his name. Telemachus, my high and mighty, fierce young friend. No more nursing those violent words and actions now. Come, eat and drink with us, just like the old days. Whatever you want, our people will provide. A ship and a picked crew to speed you to holy Pylos, out for the news about your noble father. But self-possessed Telemachus drew the line. Antinous, now how could I dine with you in peace and take my pleasure? You ruffians carousing here. Isn't it quite enough that you, my mother's suitors, have ravaged it all, my very best, these many years, while I was still a boy? But now that I'm full grown and can hear the truth from others, absorb it too. Now, yes, that the anger seethes inside me, I'll stop at nothing to hurl destruction at your heads, whether I go to Pylos or sit still here at home. But the trip I speak of will not end in failure. Go I will as a passenger, nothing more, since I don't seem to command my own crew. That, I'm sure, is the way that suits you best. So he fails to mix as Athena suggested he did, and at the very end he admits he can't captain his own ship. So we're still, Telemachus on occasion shows confidence and bravery, and on other occasions shows that he's still growing into the role. With this, he nonchalantly drew his hand from Antinous' hand, while the suitors, busy feasting in the halls, mocked and taunted him, flinging insults now. God help us, one young buck kept shouting. He wants to slaughter us all. I said, that's not begging fate. He's off to sandy Pylos to hire cutthroats, even Sparta perhaps, so hot to have our heads. Why, he'd rove as far as Ephyra's dark rich soil and run back home with lethal poison, slip it into the bowl and wipe us out with drink. Who knows, another young blade up and ventured. Off in that hollow ship of his, he just might drown, far from his friends, a drifter like his father. What a bore! He'd double our work for us, splitting up his goods, parcelling out his house to his mother, and the man who weds the queen. So this lethal poison, it was mentioned at the very beginning. I think the gods, was it one of the gods? Was it Athena talking about in book 1? Apologies if I've misremembered. But there's this reference to lethal poison, which in the warrior caste of the time would have been seen as a very low way of killing people. So they scoffed, but Telemachus headed down to his father's storeroom, broad and vaulted, piled high with gold and bronze chests packed with clothing, vats of redolent oil, and there, standing in close ranks against the wall, were jars of seasoned mellow wine, holding the drink unmixed inside them, fit for a god, waiting the day Odysseus, worn by hardships, might come home again. Doors snugly fitted, doubly hung, were bolted shut, and a housekeeper was in charge by day and night, her care, her vigilance guarding all those treasures. Euryclea, the daughter of Oops, Paesionor's son. Excuse me. Telemachus called her into the storeroom. Come, nurse, draw me off some wine in smaller travelling jars, mellow, the finest vintage you've been keeping, next to what you reserve for our unlucky king, in case Odysseus might drop in from the blue and cheat the deadly spirits, make it home. Fill me an even dozen, seal them tightly. Pour me barley in well-stitched leather bags, 20 measures of meal, your stone-ground best. But no one else must know. These rations now, put them all together. I'll pick them up myself toward evening, just about the time that mother climbs to her room and thinks of turning in. I'm sailing off to Sparta, sandy Pylos too, for news of my dear father's journey home. Perhaps I'll catch some rumour. I think that's the bit of perhaps I'll catch some rumours, maybe a slight misdirection, because he's not got that much chance of finding out what's really going on. I'd argue it serves a narrative purpose that Telemachus almost mirrors. He does a mini Odyssey that his father is engaged in. So he also is travelling like his father. And also, I think Athena's original aim was to help him go out in the world and make a name for himself, rather than just stay at home in Ithaca. A wail of grief, and his fond old nurse burst out in protest, sobbing. Why, dear child, what craziness got into your head? Why, bent on rambling over the face of the earth, a darling only son. Your father's worlds away, God's own Odysseus, dead in some strange land. And these brutes here, just wait. The moment you're gone, they'll all be scheming against you. Kill you by guile, they will, and carve your birthright up in pieces. No, sit tight here. Guard your own things here. Don't go roving over the barren salt sea. No need to suffer so. Courage, old woman, thoughtful Telemachus tried to reassure her. There's a God who made this plan. But swear you won't say anything to my mother, not till 10 or a dozen days have passed, or she misses me herself and learns I'm gone. She mustn't mar her lovely face with tears. The old one swore a solemn oath to the gods, and vowing she would never breathe a word, quickly drew off wine in two-eared jars and poured barley in well-stitched leather bags. Telemachus returned to the hall and joined the suitors. Then bright-eyed Pallas thought of one more step. Disguised as the prince, the goddess roamed through town, pausing beside each likely crewman, giving orders. Gather beside our ship at nightfall, be there. She asked Noemon, Phronius' generous son, to send her a swift ship. He gladly volunteered. The sun sank and the roads of the world grew dark. Now the goddess hauled the swift ship down to the water, stowed in her all the tackle well-rigged vessels carry, moored her well away at the harbour's very mouth, and once the crew had gathered, rallying around, she heartened every man. I'll just point out the roads of the world grew dark. That's a brilliant, the whole line, the sun sank and the roads of the world grew dark. It just gives that notion of receding distance. I don't know why, I just think that's a brilliant... I'd never really thought in terms of roads going dark. And then she heartened every man. So again, to be pursued at a future point, but this idea of charisma or the inspiration to lead people, it's encapsulated in the goddess Athena. Odysseus has this ability and Telemachus is learning it. Then bright-eyed Pallas thought of one last thing. Back she went to King Odysseus' halls, and there she showered sweet oblivion over the suitors, dazing them as they drank, knocking cups from hands. No more loitering now, their eyes weighed down with sleep. They rose and groped through town to find their beds, but calling the prince outside his timbered halls, taking the build and voice of Mentor once again, flashing-eyed Athena urged him on. Telemachus, your comrades at arms are ready at the oars, waiting for your command to launch. So come on with our voyage now, we're wasting time. And Pallas Athena sped away in the lead as he followed in her footsteps, man and goddess. Once they reached the ship at the water's edge, they found their long-haired shipmates on the beach. The prince, inspired, gave his first commands. Come, friends, get the rations aboard. They're piled in the palace now. My mother knows nothing of this, no servants either. Only one has heard our plan. He led them back, and the men fell in and fetched down all the stores and stowed them briskly, deep in the well-ribbed holds, as Odysseus' son directed. Telemachus climbed aboard. Athena led the way, assuming the pilot's seat reserved to stern, and he sat close beside her. Cables cast off, the crew swung to the oarlocks. Bright-eyed Athena sent them a stiff following wind, rippling out of the west, ruffling over the wine-dark sea, as Telemachus shouted out commands to all his shipmates. All lay hands to tackle. They sprang to orders, hoisting the pinewood mast. They stepped it firm in its block amidships, lashed it fast with stays, and with braided rawhide halyards hauled the white sail high. Suddenly wind hit full, and the canvas bellied out, and a dark blue wave foaming up at the bow sang out loud and strong as the ship made way, skimming the whitecaps, cutting toward her goal, all running gear secure in the swift black craft. They set up bowls and brimmed them high with wine, and poured libations out to the everlasting gods who never die, to Athena first of all, the daughter of Zeus with flashing sea-grey eyes, and the ship went plunging, all night long and through the dawn. Well, I'm exhausted now. I need a drink. But I hope you enjoyed that. And let me know in the comments whether, like I say, I want to do more expansive context providing, more analytical videos to talk about some of the underlying themes like ritual, reciprocity, all those type of things. But in order to just get through the text as well, it's this balancing act of getting the commentary and the analysis so it doesn't go on for, 2 hours. So hopefully that was of some use. And like I say, if you are interested, please do keep watching them. I'll definitely do the first 4 books and we'll just see whether you're interested enough to want me to do all 24. So take care, and until the next time, all the very best.